Okay, if you're here, you should be looking for ETD number 72. With ETD number 72, it's got part 2. This is B and C. So the questions that we're going after here is draw and describe all the different forms of symbiosis, and then provide a real example of each. So normally you'd, of course, give yourself a chance to stop and think about this stuff, but we're diving straight in. So with symbiosis, it's a nice good old Greek word, and sim still means the same old thing. It means same. Bio, of course, refers to life or living. So this is the idea of living things living together. That's symbiosis. And in biology, they use a couple of simple ideas to capture that. They use plus and minus symbols. So if we look at symbiosis in terms of plus, 0, or minus, the plus, of course, could be a good thing. That's called mutualism. Or you could have +0, called commensalism. Or you could have plus-minus, called predation. You could also have minus, where you have competition. There's two different varieties of that. Or you could have 0, Amensalism, which is really strange, or neutralism. And then, of course, 0-, which is Amensalism. So let's look at some examples of these. One of the most famous, of course, comes from Finding Nemo. And you can see right here, what do we got going on? We've got this wonderful thing called mutualism. The clownfish, an anemone fish, is actually benefiting because it gets protection inside of this anemone. And the anemone, of course, gets the scraps, and the little crabs that try to attack it are attacked by the anemone fish. So it gets protection. That's plus. Now, in addition to that, of course, you should notice that he's wiping his body all over because he's a slimy little fish coated with mucus. That's so that eventually the anemone is not able to recognize the clownfish as a different species in itself or a different individual, and it no longer stings it. It also gives them a protective layer. Famous examples of mutualism would be pollinators. So if we look at the birds and the bees and the sycamore trees, the angiosperm struck up their deal with insects long ago, where they get a pollinator and free transport of their pollen, and of course the bee gets some nectar to feed off of. Or a really good example, there's Jacques from Finding Nemo. He is a cleaner shrimp, and he's working his way in a very dangerous place, a moray eel's mouth, which has 2 sets of jaws, one's further in the throat. But on reefs, cleaners don't tend to get eaten by the different fish that visit them because, of course, it gives them the benefit of clearing parasites out of their teeth while giving food to the cleaner. If we look at another really good one, there's one going on in your gut right now. If you stop for some snacks, you've definitely got some E. coli. The E. coli are breaking down your food, and you're supplying them with things like tryptophan so they can use their trypoperon. Other examples I really love is if you walk around Africa, you will find acacias. And acacias, some of them have swollen thorns. And they're swollen because they were bitten by an ant. Once the thorn swells up, the ants dig a hole inside of it, and it creates a hole where the ants live inside of it. So you might ask yourself, why is the acacia actually giving them a home? In addition to that, the other thing we should notice is those ants, of course, are living on that spot, but anytime that something comes along, say, tries to feed on it, the ants are actually given bribes by the plant to feed on little fruits that are specially made just for them. So it gives them a home, it gives them a food, all because, of course, acacias have to deal with large predators like herbivores, like giant African elephants. And the cool thing is, as they start to attack and eat the leaves of the plant, it shakes the plant, which disturbs the ants. The ants come out and start biting and stinging it with formic acid, which makes the, of course, giant elephant move along. So the plant's getting a protection force, the ants are getting a home and food, they both benefit from this. Here's another example. We've got a Bengal tiger and we've got a golden jackal. Now, what's going on here? This is a form of commensalism. Anywhere that you go in India, if you're in the national parks, you'll see a tiger, and shortly behind them, you'll see a golden jackal following along. When the tigers make a kill, basically, they eat most of it, and then the jackals feed on the scraps. So this benefits, of course, the jackal, but has no negative impact on the tiger at all. Other really good examples would be these cattle egrets in Africa. Here's a giant Cape buffalo. He's moving his clumsy, huge body through the grass. That kicks up things like frogs and insects. The cattle egrets follow along. They eat the insects, but it has no real impact on the on the cattle at all. If we look at my favorite, of course, there was one time in the Philippines, my wife was snorkeling next to me. She got attacked by one of these. It's a remora fish, and oftentimes we'll see large predators with remora clinging onto them. What they're doing is they're basically getting a free ride, and sharks are messy eaters, so they feed on those things. My wife's technique was to swim directly towards me and hop onto my back and let the remora attack myself. If we look at these two species, this is an African lion. This is a cheetah. And this, of course, is competition. And nature doesn't favor competition because basically if they're feeding on the two same species, that's going to reduce the chances and whoever's the strongest, the most fit will win. So that's why lions typically kill cheetahs and especially their cubs. So what cheetahs have done is they've evolved a different strategy. They go after smaller prey like antelopes that are too small and too fast for lions to catch, and lions go after larger prey, thereby reducing this competition, which would be interspecific competition. And of course, like an interstate means it's between species. By following their own niche, this helps reduce that interspecific competition and increase their survival over time. Another example would be the more common, what we see is called intraspecific competition. This is like elk on elk, and what they're doing, of course, is this is two males. They're fighting within their own species for, well, mates, territory, and food. And typically this is what we see because you feed on the same thing as the rest of your species. This is what we call war, where humans fight with other humans for resources, right? Intraspecific competition. Now, to be specific, that is not an elk. This is paired David's deer. And it was actually found in China and then went locally extinct because they shot a bunch of them. But then, fortunately, some rich, snobby people in England kept them in a small reserve. They brought them back, and what they were doing was they then took it and kindly repopulated them back into China. And that's a swamp deer. And often with the swamp deer, what's going on there is they pick up grass with their antlers because it makes them look larger and more intimidating, which means they're less likely to actually have to fight. It's basically like football players beating on their chests and grunting so that they look scary and they get the girls that way, right? If we look at this is the story of the tapeworm, and this is this lady's actual tapeworm that she had put in her body on purpose. It's a classic Asian diet fad that's been going through. It's about 27 feet long because it stretches all the way from the inside of your intestines to the very end where they can let their egg pouches out and, of course, seed the next load of feces. This, of course, is a parasite. And parasites benefit themselves while hurting their host, but they can't kill their host. That's why they're not predating on them, because they kill the host, then the parasite dies. Another example could be cuckoo birds. This cuckoo bird looks a lot bigger than the mom that's feeding it because, of course, it was a nest parasite. Its mom laid an egg inside of the nest. It then displaced as a chick the other birds, the warbler usually, eggs, and then the warbler didn't know, so it just fed it as its own. They are nest parasites. And you can see right here that some of the birds, the warblers, have evolved a technique where their eggs have a different color so they can actually detect the nest parasites and kick it out. And then the nest parasites, over time, evolve eggs that look just like their host. So it's an arms race. Hey, look, there's my parasite. Ask your parents about parasites. They'll explain a lot more. Other good examples, of course, one of my favorites is predation. It's benefiting the mantis, it's hurting the grasshopper, but it gets its nutrients that way and keeps the populations in check. So it's not always plus minus straightforward because it keeps an ecosystem balanced. Other good examples, of course, was the story of the little zebra that tried to cross the river and there's its intestines, preyed upon by the Nile crocodile. That zebra, of course, is a predator as well. And we don't typically think of it, but herbivory is a predation. It's feeding on the grass. And as it does that, of course, it kills the grass to feed itself. But at the same time, it poops onto that grass, which gives rise to the grass. We can see that the major predator of acacias is things like the African elephant. It's a plus minus. At the same time, it also spreads the seeds of the acacia we talked about earlier this year, which allows those groves to grow. So it's this constant competition back and forth of the herbivores and their prey, the herbs, to knock down their populations, but then supply them with food. And this ties together, of course, the zebra and the elephant. If it wasn't for elephants eating the acacias, there wouldn't be grasslands that would then feed the zebras, so they keep each other alive. That's why elephants are so important in Africa. Then there's the crazy idea of neutralism, where you go up into the Arctic and you find wolves and you find rocks with lichen on them, and there's like no relationship at all because they don't hurt each other, they don't help each other. Now, I think this is phooey because if we look at this, that wolf could come along and pee on the rock, and when it pees on the rock, it puts nitrates down, which helps the lichen to grow, and at the same time, the lichen break down the rock, turn it into soil so that things like moss can grow, and then caribou come along and eat on that. So everything's connected, but it's a nice academic idea of neutralism because they wouldn't have their food if it wasn't for the lichen turning the soil. Then there's the weirdest idea of Amensalism, where one organism hurts another and has no impact on itself. This would be like penicillin. Penicillin, of course, is a mold, and it produces penicillin. Penicillin, there we go. And that penicillin is deadly to bacteria because it breaks down things like their peptidoglycan layer, but those bacteria don't even feed on Penicillium the mold. Fortunately, we picked this up and got a little bit of a commensalist relationship off of this. So there's a lot more penicillium in the world, and we use it to kill bacteria, which then allows us to overpopulate and kill everything else. This is the weirdest story all. This is a man-eating tiger in the Sundarbans. And in the Sundarbans in India, there's a large human population moving into an area that is wild, and these tigers have been taking lots of people. But instead of doing the classic thing of shooting the man-eater, they're actually re-releasing it. And this is the story of competition turning into altruism. And this is the idea that they figured out as they started to understand ecology, that if you have large predators, those large predators keep an ecosystem in balance and can then allow you to have things like the mangrove swamps that they live in, which reduce the impact of cyclones that then hit during the monsoons and kill a bunch of people in places like Bangladesh and India. So as humans get more knowledge, they start to figure out that every organism in an ecosystem helps to support the ecosystem, which in turn keeps us alive. But it's kind of a neat story where we figured out, hey, I need large predators. I need every organism. They actually benefit me, so I'll take care of them. But it's only when we figured out they helped us that we started to do that. Now, key thing is for the rest of day 72, what you go after is you're going to pick up the Eco Hot Topics worksheets. Those have the biggest topics that are hit on in ecology. The Eco Sample questions are a sample of the best questions that they tend to reuse like crazy. Today on the EcoBlitz, we've already hit questions 2 through 15 with some skipped in between, which we'll hit in the other days. So this is your chance to get yourself ready for that while I make the other ETD broadcast for ETD number 73, the second half of the EcoBlitz. Do not forget to check out the lab bench. It's got some great connections, and they love dissolved oxygen. It kind of makes all those dead zones on Earth and all our water bodies make sense. Your homework is to hit those sample questions. You can see that you're going to self-score the 2012, and you're going to start working on the 2015. You're going to do SCAR sheets for chapters 53 through 55, the ecology chapters. There's also the GRs for those that are available, but I'm not requiring them. That's up to you if you want to understand them better. Our focus for the rest of this will be on those eco hot topics, which will hit, especially in ETD 73 coming up next. Woo!